For those people who weren't here before, there's no shiurim next Thursday during Hanukkah. Everybody knows.
Okay, so given that tonight's Hanukkah, I chose a topic, the power of the candle's light, and really the idea that candles play a very significant role in our weekly and yearly experiences, right? So when do we light candles? Shabbos, right? To bring in Shabbat, we're going to talk about that. Yortzeit, right? The idea that somehow the power of the candle to elicit a sense of memory of the loss of a loved one is very, very present in our yearly life cycles. Throughout the Shiva, of course, we have a candle that burns. What's another occasion on which we light candles? Birthdays, okay, nice. Not necessarily a Jew, but I agree. Birthdays play a role. Birthday candles are evocative of time passing. What?
Yom Tov.
Yom Tov, right? So similar to Shabbat, we light candles, which is interesting because Shabbat, we need to light the candles before Shabbat because we can't create fire on Shabbat. Yom Tov, we don't have the same urgency, and yet we also bring it in with a candle. And what about exiting Shabbat? Havdalah, of course, and tonight we have the Hanukkah candle. So if we just pause for a moment, candles play a very significant role ritually in our experience of sanctified time. And when I say sanctified time, designated time, and that can include a yortzeit or a birthday, right? Of course, birthday is not a religious practice, and yet given how present candles are in our lives, we recognize there's something powerful in the symbolism of the birthday candle as well. Okay, so let's start with Shabbat candles, because Shabbat is weekly, and we light Shabbat candles every week, and there's no source for Shabbat candles. In other words, not in the Torah, not in the Nach, right? By the time we get to the Mishnah, Bameh Madlikin, it's already clear that we are lighting candles, and then we need to define how we light candles, because that's what we do, especially in the Mishnah. But the meaning for Shabbat candles really takes up a lot of different spaces, right? What are some of the meanings given for why we light Shabbat candles? We need to see is why I think the practice starts, right? The idea that you can't create fire. Fire is one of the most explicit references to prohibitions on Shabbat, right? You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat. That malachot, the rabbis have to flesh out 39 malachot. But fire is the quintessential example of what you are prohibited to do. We'll talk a little bit about the creation of fire shortly and Adam's ability to create fire, but that becomes the example of an act prohibited on Shabbat, and so you have to light your candles before Shabbat if you want to sit down to a meal in which there will be warmth and light. And let's be honest, for those who remember what it was like having young children, can you imagine having Friday night? They fight as it is, but in the dark, he pulled my hair, she kicked me, and I can't see as the parent who did what, and food is spilling all over. It will be a disaster, right? If we talk about as it is Friday night dinners, when I was raising my children, often were the most contentious meals of the week, right? In the dark, it would be really problematic. So you're lighting candles before Shabbat because you have no choice, really, and then we begin the mining of let's create a sanctified space and a bracha and meaning for it and so on. And we're going to see that in the Rambam. Anyone like to read? Because I talk enough in the hour. Any volunteers to read the Rambam, Mishnah Torah? No one likes to read. Okay. The kindling of a Shabbat lamp is not a matter left to our volition. It's not a matter about which if one desires, one may kindle. But if one does not desire, one need not. Okay, it's not like, well, if I want to sit I want light, I'll light the candles. This is not optional, right? The Rambam says. Nor is it a mitzvah we are not obligated to pursue. He gives example of Eruv. If you don't want to carry, you don't have to create an Eruv. And if you don't want to eat bread, how many of us are like, I don't feel like washing. I don't want to eat bread, I'll eat everything else at the meal, right? You don't have to wash. He says, no, this is an obligation. So he starts off clarifying that there's an obligation here, as we're going to see by the end in the Rambam's, inimitable way. He's going to clarify it's rabbinic. But in my first paragraph, it seems like it's doraita, meaning to say you don't have a choice here. It's not a matter of choice or wish or I want the light. It's an obligation. Both men and women are obligated to have a lamp lit in their homes on Shabbat. Now, again, this is very important because I do a lot of teaching of women in halakha and gender in Judaism. And it's clear that at a certain point, the Shabbat candles become associated as a woman's mitzvah. It's not a woman's mitzvah. The only mitzvah that's really absolutely a woman's mitzvah is nida and mikvah because of her body, right? There are certain things that women are obligated to do in contrast to men. But Shabbat and Challah are not women's mitzvot. They become women's mitzvot, right? I'm not taking it away from the women, but the reality is male bakers, and that would have been the profession in the time of the Mishnah, had to take Challah, and men who bake have to take Challah, right? It's not gendered in the sense to the exclusion of men. But the meaning given to both Challah and Shabbat candles is very much because Chazal recognized the centrality and the importance of women in the home and what women bring into the home, and lighting of those candles really becomes the sign of welcoming Shabbat into the home, and really it becomes very distinctively a woman's mitzvah. And of course, I grew up with Chabad giving out candles, and I remember getting a little copper candlestick that, the idea was that I would light candles with my mother, which it wasn't really our minhag, but the idea that women and girls light candles, right, that is something so redolent of the Jewish home and the Jewish practice. And of course, today men light candles. Certainly have that phenomena as well. And the Rambam says men and women are obligated. Both. It's about light in the home. Even if a person does not have food to eat, he should beg from door to door and purchase oil to kindle a lamp, for this is included in, he calls it Oneg Shabbat. In the Gemara Rashi talks about Kvod Shabbat, not quite the same thing, honoring the Shabbat, delighting in the Shabbat. There are nuances between what honor and delight are. We'll leave that for the side. This is not a shiur specifically on Shabbat candles. And in addition, we have Shlom Bayit, right? That comes up in the Gemara. And actually in the Gemara, they have examples of men lighting the candles, right? Amoraim, who took it upon themselves, Rav Shizvi, his father would prepare and light the candles. It was such a beloved mitzvah to him, and it gave a very clear sign to his son how important this mitzvah is, to run out and prepare for it in advance. One is obligated to recite a blessing before kindling the Shabbat lamp, of course, Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Even though it's a rabbinic law, right? It's a rabbinic decree. It's not d'oraita. We still say Asher Kedeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu using God's name. We do that for Hanukkah. We do it for Purim as well. In other words, there's this synergy between rabbinic law and biblical law, or the idea of commandments coming from God that are both reflected in direct Torah commandments and in rabbinic law, and we use the same bracha, the same template for bracha for both rabbinic and biblical law. So that was just a little bit of an introduction, because Shabbat candles are something that are so present for us. And of course we light Yom Tov candles as well for similar reasons, right? Oneg and Kvod and Shlom Bayit, even though practically we don't really need to light the candles before Yom Tov, as long as we have some fire we can continue to kindle from it, but nonetheless that becomes the way, the entry point into sanctified space is through lighting candles. And I want to pause. We're going to come back a little bit to candles and the lighting of candles. Before we do that, I want to look at a pasuk in Mishlei, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam Chofes Kol Chadrei Vaten. Really very beautiful metaphor for the candle of God is within the soul of Adam, searching all of one's deepest places. And this is going to lead to a lot of commentary and interpretation. What is this Ner? What is this candle of God residing within the soul of the human? And I'm just going to bring two ideas. We're going to end with a Sfat Emet who also reflects on this idea of the candle of God. But I'm going to contrast Gersonides, who's a philosopher, who's an Aristotelian rationalist, right? And when he sees this pasuk, what does he say? The candle of God, to explain the soul of Adam, is the intellect, which is the candle of God, and explores all the hidden places. So when Gersonides looks at what is the soul of Adam, what is unique to the soul of human beings, what is the Tselem Elokim, what is this candle of God, which is the Tselem, right? What is God infused into the human? It's the intellect, right? It's the ability to think rationally, to make informed decisions, right, between right and wrong, between good and bad. And so Gersonides says that is the candle of God, the ability to intellectually reflect and search out wisdom, and search out, I would say, ethics, morality, right? The ability to think and to then decide is what is the candle of God within the soul of man. Yankee Tauber, Chabad.org, I took this from Sfaria, I don't know who Yankee Tauber is, but on the right I have the Baal Tanya. The Baal Tanya, Rav Shner Zalman of Liadi, He also brings Aristotelian philosophy here in his interpretation of this verse. And so I chose to bring Yankee Tauber, even though I feel like he is reflecting beautifully what the Baal Tanya, and I'm sure deliberately, what the Baal Tanya is saying. So we're going to read the English. We yearn to tear free of our wick, of the body that anchors us to the physical reality. If I would look at the Baal Tanya says the candle, the light of the candle, the fire, is mitna'aneh tamid lamala. It's always moving upward. The fire is always trying to grow upward, betivo, in its nature. Why? Because or ha'esh chafetz beteva liparein meyachtila. That the fire really wishes to disconnect from the wick in its interest in like expanding outward and upward. And so what Yankee then paraphrases is, we yearn to tear free of our wick. And what is the parallel? Our body. The nimshal is our body that anchors us to the physical reality and sullies us with physical needs and wants. And initially, I'm a little taken aback by that. We're going to see where he's going. He's suggesting that people really strive for, especially in Chassidut, right, this idea of striving upward towards transcendence, towards spiritual growth, can sometimes cause us to feel the need to separate from our bodies. We strive upwards, yearning to transcend the physical, the human, and the particular, and fuse with the universal and the divine. At the same time, we cling to the body, to the bit of matter that sustains us as dynamic and productive participants in God's world. In other words, he comes to what I think is distinctly Jewish in our attitude towards the body, which is God created the body. And like the flame cannot disconnect from the wick, or there's no fire, the soul cannot disconnect from the body, because without the body, there's essentially no interaction between soul and body. There's hevel, there's a lack of corporality, which might be godlike to some degree, but at the same time is certainly not human. And the idea of the soul of God, the candle of God in the soul of man, is the lodging of God within us, within our bodies. It is this perpetual up and down, this incessant vacillation from selfhood to selflessness and back again that we call life. It's this eternal tension between our desire to escape the physical and our commitment to inhabit it, develop it, sanctify it, that make us spiritual beings. Now, again, it's not that it's this enormous chiddush, but it really is presented so beautifully, right? And he's using the candle of God as the soul of man, right? We can sit and gaze at the flame for hours because we are gazing at ourselves. This idea that within us is the soul, is this spiritual ability to transcend, and yet to be anchored in the ability to achieve some sort of transcendence, we have to interact with our bodies. Meaning our bodies are the frame for the soul, and we have to work with that interface between physical and spiritual, and only then can we achieve any sort of real transcendence. So that was just, again, this idea that the metaphor of the candle of God. I mean, why does God need a candle, right? What does that mean that God is a candle within us? But using that metaphor of somehow the wick and the fire and the flame. And I had a student yesterday who drew a lovely picture where he felt the candle of God was enveloping the body, right, as opposed to within, right? We tend to think within, but is the ma'atefet, is the envelope around which we interface with the world, right? That God envelopes us in some way with God's candle, with God's light, and we then, with our body, try to work upwards from that, towards that. Okay, so we've seen two ideas that I'm just going to summarize, and then we're going to move on. We've talked about the necessity of having light as we go into Shabbat, both practically and then very much spiritually. The idea of light in the home reflected in the candle. Now we've gone very individual, right? We went from something a little more macro maybe to something more micro. The idea that every one of us has within us the candle of God burning within our soul, or within our soul, right? The candle of God is the soul of Adam, the intellect, the spirit, however we want to understand it. But there's something in the image of the candle lighting up dark spaces that is meant to reflect our relationship or potential relationship with God. Okay, we're going to start moving slightly towards Hanukkah. Let's take a look at this source in Avodah Zarah, really an amazing source. It's a source that recognizes, meaning one of the things that I think often, and I'm sure there have been many shiurim here, and you're all people of wisdom and people of the book, the question of where does Hanukkah come from? And I think for many of us, we love the story. It's a very sweet story, The Candle That Could. But many of us are looking for something more historical, something more, something that has more layers of depth, perhaps, and nuance as to why Hanukkah is the holiday it is. So the story is, I would say, the outward-facing reason, but often many academics have also tried to understand where does the story come from, where does the holiday come from. And what we have in Avodah Zarah is an awareness that we need a winter solstice festival. That, in other words, at a time of darkness, where days are short and nights are long, where it's colder than although it's funny to say cold because I'm hot. You walk outside, it's very hot. But in Sweden yesterday, because I taught an online share in Sweden, it was minus 12 Celsius. That's cold, right? And it gets dark at like 3:30 in the afternoon. And really, they have winter solstice festivals that go on for quite a bit of December. I was there, I had the fortune, I was invited twice to Limud conference in Sweden, which is at this time of year, right? The darkest, coldest time of the year, and they have a lot of light everywhere. Like, it's quite amazing at night how everything becomes, these huge reindeer, if you've seen it, that are lit up, like they play on light in the darkness beautifully. But the Mishnah already is aware that the Greeks and the Romans have winter solstice festivals. Again, pre-Christmas, pre-Kwanzaa, pre all the kind of modern evolutions of those pagan festivals, that there is a need for a festival of light in the middle of winter. And so what Avodah Zarah is going to say is, yes, you know what, that's very nice, right? They celebrate winter solstice, but Adam, let's go back to Adam. And so this, to me, is a precursor, a little bit, of Hanukkah, right? This idea, what happens to Adam? This is based on the idea that Adam's created in Tishrei. Don't worry, the Gemara is going to bring the machloket, Tishrei or Nisan, but we're going to go with Tishrei right now because it fits well with the story. The idea is Adam's created in Tishrei. That's why Rosh Hashanah is in Tishrei. And, of course, Adam is created on a Friday. He sins on a Friday. He gets thrown out of Gan Eden on a Friday, right? All before Shabbat. And he begins his journey in life knowing death awaits him and winter begins. So that's what's happening here, right? So Adam is going to experience for the first time in his life winter without knowing what that means, and he knows death awaits him, but he doesn't know what death is, right? And so what happens in the story? When Adam the first saw the day was diminishing, so he says, "Woe is me, because perhaps I sinned and the world is becoming dark all around me. And it's going to return to tohu vavohu." Right? As the days get shorter, he's like, this must be what God promised or explained when he destined me to death, when he let me know that death will come, maybe the whole world is going to die, right? Maybe that's what's going to happen. And so what he does is, as the days get increasingly shorter, the nights longer, and darkness overtakes him, he says he arises and spends 8 days in fasting and in prayer. And we're supposed to understand this is the last 8 days of the year before the winter solstice, before the shortest day of the year. He gets up and he fasts and he prays. And we say, wow, kol hakavod, what a tzaddik, right? Tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah. He's doing a form of tshuva. He's repenting. He's fasting. He's praying. 8 days. 8 days is interesting because it's 1 day past creation, right? He comes up with 8. And that's it. We get to the shortest day of the year. And the world does not explode or implode or return to tohu vavohu. When he wakes up the day after the winter solstice, the day, he notices, is a few minutes longer. And so what he notices is every day gets a little longer. And so what he says is, and I think it's brilliant, he does not say it's because of my fasting and prayer, right? As much as we believe that fasting and prayer make change, Adam recognizes, no, I don't think that's what happened here. He says, minhago shel olamhu. This is the natural order of things. In other words, what he recognizes, and I had a student, I taught this at a Reform synagogue at the beginning of the week in New York, and she was so taken by the ability of the Gemara to recognize science as part of the creation. She's like, not now, but she's like, this is why Orthodox Jews can be scientists. This awareness that in creation, there is minhago shel olam. There are rules of nature, that the cycles of the seasons, the cycles of night and day and sun and moon and stars are scripted from creation, right? There's a natural order, minhago shel olamhu, that Adam doesn't go to, oh, this is because God forgave me. He goes to, oh, now I see the brilliance in the order of creation, and that every year this is going to happen. This is going to repeat itself. I can be secure in recognizing that there is a cycle of nature that God created and put in motion, and that that's not going to be touched, not by my sin, not by the evils of mankind. There is an order to creation. And so what he does the following year is he celebrates 16 days. That would be nice, 16 days of Hanukkah. 8 days before the solstice, 8 days after. And I want to lean into that a little. What does he celebrate? He celebrates the days of darkness and then the emergence into light. Right? That's what he's celebrating. The awareness that every year we're going to be plunged into this period of darkness. And with it comes a sense of hopelessness and despair and sadness, right? We know SAD, seasonal affective disorder. Again, less common here perhaps than in the northern England and in Netherlands, right, where it really gets cold and dark. But nonetheless, we're aware that people in the winter feel down, right? There's a sense of feeling down, that there's so much darkness. And so he celebrates that this is the order of the world. This too is from God. And then emergence into light. And I think symbolically, it's a very powerful message that beyond the world of science and cycles and nature, there is an awareness that we will be plunged into periods of darkness and we will always emerge into the light. And that is what we're celebrating at Hanukkah, right? Because we'll get to the military victory and we'll get to light in the darkness. But I think even by looking at the laws of nature, Adam recognizes the juxtaposition of darkness of light, of winter to spring, right? There's a necessary juxtaposition of experiencing the darkness before being led into the light. Okay. Let's take a look at Genesis Rabbah, Bereshit Rabbah. This is going to take us back to that first Shabbos. So I brought you to the first winter Adam experienced, the awareness that the rabbis have that we must have a light festival in the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the winter. We're going to be competing with the pagans, later with the Christians. In other words, we have to have a festival of light that's going to take place at this time of year. What it's going to be based on? Well, we know what it's going to be based on shortly, but I will say there's an awareness that this holiday has to exist, and it has to be a festival that celebrates light in the darkness. Okay? Next, we have Bereshit Rabbah. So I want to talk a little bit about, again, light in the darkness, the candle that gets lit. What we have here is his first Shabbat. So as I already said, we know Adam is exiled from Gan Eden already on Friday, but God does a miracle. And this is a miracle that doesn't really repeat itself, but God doesn't have the sun set. Well, maybe with Joshua, right, where the sun doesn't set. But the sun doesn't set for 36 hours, right? So Adam's created on Friday. In honor of Shabbat, God allows the sun to remain shining. Then there's the day, and Motzei Shabbat. For every Shabbat, there's a Motzei Shabbat, and I think I know that often I feel very sad as Shabbat ends. There's like almost this uncontrollable sadness, and Adam experiences darkness for the first time ever, and he is terrified of the serpent, right? Because God has promised death, and God has promised enmity between him and the serpent, who's going to be slithering on the ground. And the serpent is not a little garden snake, right? It's like a basilica. It's this enormous, enormous creature. And he is terrified that the darkness will envelope me, right? This darkness, yeshufeni. And what happens in a subversion of the Prometheus myth? The Midrash tells us God kind of illuminates two rocks, two flints, lying there in the garden on the floor of wherever Adam is, and Adam then has to figure out what to do. Right? If we go back to Gersonides in the intellect, this is a perfect reflection of what Gersonides is talking about. The candle of God is the soul of Adam. Adam recognizes, thanks to his Tzelem Elokim, right, to his intellect, oh, what would happen if I rubbed these two stones together? A spark is created, and then fire. Right? Why do I say subversion of Prometheus? The gods want to leave human beings in the cold and dark. They do not want human beings to create or discover fire, because they want human beings to be weak and to be vulnerable and to be afraid. And Prometheus steals the fire and brings it to them and is punished forever after. Okay. His liver is pecked out. The liver, by the way, with all the blood, was thought to be the seat of intellect also. Right? Like there's something about the liver and intellect. God is not afraid of human beings being in the light and in the warmth and using their intellect. And so in this midrash, God invites Adam to create. which brings us back perhaps to Shabbat, that the first act of creation, according to the Midrash, of the human is the creation of fire. And what does the fire do? The fire allows Adam to bring light into Adam's darkness, right? So symbolically, I hope we know where we're going, right? This idea that source number one, recognizing in our lives there are cycles that God has, in God's providence, has set in motion in the world, the juxtaposition of darkness and light. In the second source, God gives Adam the ability to recognize Adam has resources and tools to light up Adam's own darkness, right? Not everything has to be a miracle. Adam has to learn, vikivshua, to go out in the world, pru urvu, milu ataretz vikivshua. Adam has to learn that he has to take ownership over a world which supplies him with resources to create, right? Resources to be godlike in that sense, in that ability to create fire from nothing, right? And that's what Adam essentially does here. And then what Adam says is, night becomes light in my darkness. It's a play on a pasuk in Tehillim. Even in the darkness I can bring in light. So I brought two sources that really play on the experience of darkness and how we experience darkness, where resilience can come from. And in one source, it's this awareness darkness will emerge to light. In the second, it's the ability to actually create light in the darkness. And I think that's why, right, Shabbat, we go back to Shabbat. Why is fire the example of what we can't do? Because fire is an act of creation. And it was the first act of creation. And that's what you have to rest from, that power of creation that we're able to access because God created us with that ability. Okay, moving on. One more idea before we get good. We'll have time to be with Hanukkah. Anyone have a comment or a question before I get to extinguishing the candle? Something, right? We've looked at quite a few sources. I know I move very quickly, so if something needs to be reinforced, I'm happy. Or someone has an idea they want to share? No? Okay, great. Sometimes the candle has to be extinguished. So I left out a series of Mishnah. I don't know if there's a Mishnah on Shabbat here, but okay. In Bameh Madlikin, we say it Friday night. Some of us say it Friday night, so it's probably right here. There is a very interesting Mishnah, which I'll just summarize, that there are times you're allowed to extinguish the candle. Okay? It doesn't say you're obligated. I want to suggest that if there's definite danger, you're obligated to extinguish the candle, pikuach nefesh. But shema mitzareh, right? You're afraid of goyim, listim, or ruach ra'ah. Right? Very interesting three examples. Because and mitnesha mitzareh, because he experiences fear. So there are times we need to extinguish the candle because there's a perception of danger, and then the Mishnah says patur. Right? Again, if it's pikuach nefesh, I don't say patur. I say mutar or chayav. Right? If there's pikuach nefesh, I'm actually obligated to extinguish the candle, right, to save life. But here, it's interesting, you're exempt from having to bring a chatat, right, when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, and I'm exempt from having actively violated Shabbat, right, I'm exempt. But it's very interesting to me there, the examples, they also bring for the choleh who needs to sleep, right, all of these times where sometimes we need to extinguish the candle to feel safe, to feel not seen, right? Sometimes it's easier to have a difficult conversation in the dark. I'll just say I remember when I was 10 years old, my parents went out and they left me babysitting. I have a brother 13 months younger than me and then a sister a little younger, and I think they took my baby sister. I'm sure they did. They wouldn't have left us home. And I remember we turned off all the lights and my brother went and got a baseball bat and we sat behind the sofa. And all we heard all night were robbers coming in, right? That's the Mipnei Mityareh. Right? And by the way, I'm sure any of your children will tell you the same story, right? That memory of being left alone in a house, even though it's a completely safe neighborhood. We lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was very, very safe. And that's why my parents left us. But that fear of we have to turn off all the lights so no one thinks we're home and we'll hide and we'll have the baseball bat, right? Sometimes we need to extinguish the candle because of a perception. Sometimes, here I've been talking about light in the darkness. We need to light up the darkness. Sometimes we need the darkness. We need the darkness to protect us. Sometimes when we're sick, we need the darkness to be able to heal. And now I want to bring one more example that's here in Brachot with Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Meir V'kein Tana Mishmei de Rabbi Akiva La'olam Yehei Adam Ragil La'omar Kol Da'avid Rachmana L'tav Avid. So this is very famous that Rabbi Akiva was known for saying everything that God does litova. I want to be very precise here. He doesn't say it is good to experience those things, right? Litova, it is for good. It will be for good. He saw the world, again, as an opportunity, right? He saw God's presence in the world as ultimately leading towards good, even if the moment is not good. Okay, let's see the story. He had Rabbi Akiva to have a ka'azal ba'orcha. Rabbi Akiva was on a journey, right? Once upon a time, Rabbi Akiva went on a trip. Mitala hi mata. He turned off into a town. By ushpiza lo yahavele. So he looks for ushpizin, right? We say the word ushpizin when we invite people in. So he looks for ushpize. He looks for someone to take him in to practice hachnasat orchim, like Avram. And no one offers him. Lo yahavele. No, doors are all closed. Amar kol da'avid rachmana letav. Everything God does letova. Okay, lo naim. Right? This is not a great experience, but it'll be for good. Azal uvat b'davra. He went and he resided in a sadeh. A davra is a sadeh. He went out to the field. V'hava bahade tarnagolda v'chamara shraga. I really feel like this should be a great joke. He had a candle, a rooster, and a donkey. A man walked into a bar with a candle, a rooster, and a donkey. Like, wow, what an interesting juxtaposition of objects or things that he has with him. Okay, so he has these three things, and he's out in the field. Ata zika kavye l'shraga. So a wind came along and extinguished the candle. Ata shunara achle l'tarnagola. The cat came along. By the way, if you're thinking of Chagadya, the shunra, right? Shunara achle l'tarnagola. The shunra eats the rooster. Ata arye. Now we have a lion. Wow. Achle l'chamara. The lion comes along and eats the donkey. Which again, this is terrifying, right? Like this is an apocalypse moment. The candle goes out. The rooster is devouring the cat is devouring the rooster, which I'm sure shrieking going on and so on. And then the lion and the donkey, and he's experiencing all of this very vulnerable and unprotected in the field. I will say I'm actually learning Yirmiyahu right now with a student at Pardes. Oh my God, the lion imagery there is really intense. Learning Yirmiyahu right now is very, very intense. But we have this lion devouring a donkey, and somehow, lo and behold, no one touches Rabbi Akiva, right? He survives. And what happens? Amar kol da'avid rachmana l'tav. And he keeps, I feel like as a mantra, saying to himself, whatever God does, l'tov. Whatever God does, l'tov, right? Like that's the way you self-comfort throughout the night. I can never read this line now without going back to October 7th. Every Torah I learn, it has like multiple meanings. But a garrison came, an army came and took the city into captivity, right? Like while he was in the field. Interesting that now we were in Aramaic. We now this line is specifically in Hebrew, and he turns to his friends and he says, "Didn't I tell you l'tova? Hakol l'tova?" Right? Like I survived this, and now I recognize l'tova. Again, I don't believe he's saying mida k'neged mida and those wicked people. That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying, "Look, I escaped it. It was a terrible experience. I had a terrible night. I thought I was going to die. In the end, I was alive, and they were taken into captivity." Right? So this l'tova. Sometimes the candle is extinguished. And we don't know what the l'tova will be, but I would like to draw on Rabbi Akiva's emunah, right? And that's what I want to share with all of us, this idea that we have to believe l'tova, that we will be somewhere l'tova, even if in the moment that the candle is extinguished, we do not know where it is taking us. Okay, moving on to Hanukkah, because that's a story in which a candle was extinguished and then relit, right? That's really a wonderful example of moving from darkness into a light, candle being extinguished, candle being relit. Ditanu Rabbanan. So my Chanukah. We're going to look in Shabbat 21b. B'kafhe b'kislev yomei de Chanukah tamanya inun de la lemispad bahon v'lo lehitanot bahon. So this line is in Aramaic, Eretz Yisrael, Galilean Aramaic, not Babylonian Aramaic, and it appears in a scroll Megillat Ta'anit, which you may have heard of. Right? There's a wonderful scholar named Professor Vera Noam, who did the academic version of this Megillah. It's a Megillah that is really one of our only rabbinic texts from the Second Temple. I know that the Mishnah is written down in 200 CE. This is from Bayit Sheni, and what it has, and it's really just a list of dates. It's not, on one hand, not very exciting. On the other hand, if you're an academic scholar, it's a whole world that is being revealed. It's, I believe, 36 dates. That's what I remember off the top of my head. That you don't fast and you don't eulogize. Minor celebrations. The only two dates that will be familiar to you are Hanukkah and Purim. The rest are all dates commemorating military victories at the time. There's Nicanor Day, right? Yom Nicanor, you've heard of Nicanor because there's Nicanor Gate. Days that we defeated Antiochus. There's a day in Adar where rain came, the story of Choni, right? The 8th and 9th of Adar. And so, but the rest of the dates we don't commemorate or celebrate in any way. What's left are Hanukkah and Purim. And what's interesting is the reason given there, the 8 days, right? There's going to be 8 days. There's no real, the miracle doesn't appear. The whole question, where does the miracle of the 8 days of light, the candle that doesn't go out, appear? And it does not appear in the earlier versions, right? In Maccabees, it doesn't appear in Josephus, it doesn't appear in Megillat Ta'anit. That's fine. I mean, again, we could do a detective class and try to search for the origin. That's not what I'm doing here. But I am showing you that the Gemara is bringing Megillat Ta'anit, right? That is the earliest source that we have for the celebration of Hanukkah. Okay, what comes next is Tanu Rabbanan. So now we're going to see, the Tanu Rabbanan was the beginning. Shenichnesu Yevanim lehechal timu kol hashemanim shebehechal ukshegavra malchut beit Chashmonai v'nitzchum badku v'lo matzu el hapach echad shel shemen. So what I have here, first of all, are two very important pieces. Number one, a military victory. Number two, a rededication of the temple. Right? Before we even get to the miracle, I already recognize that something singular happened at this time. We both managed to overcome the Greeks militarily, and we came back into the temple, and we discovered only one vial of oil. V'lo hayabo ela ladlik yom echad. And a miracle occurred, and the light lasted for 8 days. And now comes a line that really that appears in Josephus. In Josephus, the description of the first Hanukkah is because they did not celebrate Sukkot, right? They were hiding in the caves and in the cisterns, and they were waiting to be massacred essentially by the Greeks. And thanks to the military victory, they overcome on the 25th of Kislev, and they celebrate 8 days as a do-over. For the Sukkot, they did not celebrate. That's how Josephus describes it. And he says in the next line, L'shana acheret kvaum v'asum yamim tovim b'halel v'hoda'ah. In other words, the next year it was about Halel and Hoda'ah, right? It wasn't about Sukkot anymore. They could celebrate Sukkot, but it became a time of Thanksgiving and Halel. And really, I feel like here what we're seeing, we've got Megillat Ta'anit, and we have this line that clearly was important. Whatever happened that first year, the following years become about Halel and Hoda'ah. A little bit like Adam, right? Back in that Avodah Zarah source. The first year was, wow. First he thought everything was coming to an end, and then 8 days to celebrate that I survived. But following that, it became about Halel and Hoda'ah, recognizing God's providence in the world. And the same thing is happening, same process, right? This idea that the first year is about commemorating what's happening in the moment, but the following years are about bringing thanks to God, a little like Sukkot, right? Halel and Hoda'ah into these 8 days, which are going to become very important in terms of the cycle of the year and having a holiday of light at a time of darkness. Okay, if we take a quick look, I'm just going to do an aside, almost in parentheses, Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, because really I teach a class called Talmudic Personalities at Matan on Thursday morning. I just came from there. And we spent a lot of time in Hillel and Shammai. We use Rav Lau's books, The Sages, as the order in which we look at the sages. And we all know the Machloket Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel, right? Beit Shammai says you start with 8 and you go down to 1. Beit Hillel says you go from 1 to 8. And various suggestions are given right here in this passage why they differ. But really, after I spent a lot of time with Hillel and Shammai last year, I began to realize there's something deeper than what the Talmud presents in Shabbat. Shammai, if you'll remember, every day wakes up, and what is Shammai waiting for? What is Shammai waiting for? Anyone know? He's waiting for Shabbos. Every day is about preparing for Shabbos. For Shammai, true moments of Kedusha are the days that are separate and distinct and that are set aside for sanctity. That's where you can truly encounter God. Every other day is just preparing, right? There's a pale comparison of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, because what you're waiting for is Shabbat. Shammai waits for moments of transcendence, and transcendence can only come on days that are designated as Kadosh, not days that are Chol. And so it makes sense that for Shammai, the first day of Hanukkah, 8 days, I've got 8 days of Kedusha ahead of me. 8, but wait, now it's only 7, and then 6, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The day after Hanukkah for Shammai is a day of paleness, like it's colorless. It's like there's no sanctity. It's empty, right? He has to begin preparing for Shabbos. but he's counting from the height, the moment of like, I have 8 days ahead, and then 7 and 6, because those days are the days that hold transcendence for Shammai. And the next day, there's no transcendence on the day after Hanukkah. There's just preparing for the next moment of transcendence. Hillel, in contrast, every day wakes up and says, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. Every day Hillel wakes up and says, today is a day I can encounter God in wherever I am. Whether it's in nature, whether it's in the Beit Midrash. And Shabbos will be Shabbos. And Shabbos is special and Shabbos is unique. But Sunday is also a day that I can have a religious experience and that I can be with God. And so Hillel, 1 and 2 and 3, he can move upwards, right? Olin b'kedusha, because the next day for Hillel is not a 0 day, is not a day of emptiness, is not a day where I feel the lack of. Day after Hanukkah is a day I get up and I put on my talis and my tefillin and I go to Minyan and I feel God's presence. And I really feel that is a much deeper understanding of this machloket that reflects very well their own interaction. And it's not a matter of right or wrong, but it explains a little bit why we're drawn to Hillel. Right? There's an optimism to Hillel, or an inspiration to Hillel in seeing that candle of God illuminating our soul all of the time in everything we do, not just on the days designated as days of Kodesh, where God is going to come and be present at our Shabbat table, and etc. Okay, let's take a look at Rabbi Sachs. After the destruction of the Second Temple, many rabbis were convinced that Hanukkah should be abolished. After all, it celebrated the rededication of the temple, and the temple was no more. It had been destroyed by the Romans under Titus. Without a temple, what was there left to celebrate? The Talmud tells us that in at least one town, Lod, Hanukkah was abolished. Yet eventually the other views prevailed, which is why we celebrate Hanukkah to this day. Why? Because though the temple was destroyed, Jewish hope was not destroyed. We may have lost the building, but we still had the story and the memory and the light. And what had happened once in the days of the Maccabees could happen again. It was those words, Odlo Avda Tikvatenu, our hope is not destroyed, became part of the song HaTikva that inspired Jews to return to Israel and rebuild their ancient state. So as you light the Hanukkah candles, remember this. The Jewish people kept hope alive, and hope kept the Jewish people alive. We are the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind. I have to say, I am so grateful to Rabbi Sachs, who continues to be a light to us and so much wisdom and so much inspiration, and really not much more to add to that. I want to bring another idea he brings on Hanukkah, different idea, distinct. The symbol of Hanukkah is the menorah we light for 8 days in memory of the temple candelabrum, purified and rededicated by the Maccabees all those centuries ago. Faith is like a flame. Properly tended, it gives light and warmth, but let loose, it can burn and destroy. We need in the 21st century a global Hanukkah, a festival of freedom for all the world's faiths. For though my faith is not yours and your faith is not mine, if we are free to light our own flame, together we can banish some of the darkness of the world. And Halavai, right, that vision, that in this month, all of the religions of the world could come together and light lights together that are meant to bring warmth and light and goodness into the world. Wow, what a different place it would be. And I think there's something, again, he recognizes that this is a month in which many religions are celebrating a festival of light. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all light our lights together in a way that can banish darkness? I'm going to now go to the Sfat Emet and finish with Rav Kook. We're almost done. I feel like the Sfat Emet allows us perhaps to tie up some of the, I hope I have the Sfat Emet. Do you have it? Yeah, okay, great. Last page. Especially at this season, when lights were miraculous. Now, the Sfat Emet is commenting on the pasuk, Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam, right? That pasuk in Proverbs and Mishlei we looked at. Especially at this season, when lights were miraculously lit for Israel, even though they did not have enough oil, there remains light even now to help us, with the aid of these Hanukkah candles, to find the hidden light within. Okay, so again, beautiful idea that the Hanukkah candles help us. As Yankee Taub says, the idea we're mesmerized by the light of the candles because we see ourselves within them. There's something very hypnotic, something transcendent, right? If we just sit a fire in the fireplace or a campfire or candles, right? If we can really sit in quiet and introspect around fire quite a bit. The Hanukkah candles are a spiritual symbol, the light of the commandments by which we search out our inner selves. And now he's going to go deeper, and he's going to say the Hanukkah candles are just one means, right? They are literally a candle, but really all mitzvot are lights in which we can search out our inner selves. We seek out the hidden divine light within ourselves. The mitzvot are light-seeking candles. What a powerful idea, right? That every mitzvah we do, every act of chesed that we do, right? Every keeping of Shabbos that we do, those are the light-seeking candles, instruments given to us to aid in that search. And I really feel like this is Hillel. Hillel gets up every day and says, what mitzvahs can I do? What light can I bring into the world? And Shammai's like, yeah, that's nice, do your mitzvahs, but like Shabbos, that's where you're really going to feel the light. And I feel that the Sfat Emet is inspiring us by saying the Hanukkah candles are really a visceral image, right? We light them, we see them, we feel them, we don't have any benefit from them. All we do is experience the light. But really, they're meant to inspire us to go out and do mitzvah, which are light-seeking candles. And then if we go back to the candle of God is the soul of Adam, right? God has given us the mitzvot and that ability to access, right? That is what perhaps ignites or lights or increases the light of the candle of God within us, are these light-seeking candles of mitzvot that help us aid in this search. And so I think that one more source, I'll finish with Rav Kook, but really there's tremendous power to candles in our year, right? If we go to the Yortzeit candle, which could be, it's our sign of loss and our sign of sadness and yet memory, right? There's something in the power of the candle to illuminate the dark places within us, the dark places outside. And we're fortunate that our religion is one in which the candle plays a regular part, right? We have the Shabbat candle and the Havdalah candle and the Yortzeit candle and the Chag candle, and now we have the Hanukkah candles. And what's unique about the Hanukkah candles is that really they're meant to go even further, right? They're only once a year, and they're at a time that allows us to connect our past, our present, and looking l'tova into our future through this really incredible ritual. And so I want to inspire all of us, right, to use this opportunity to think about how we can further the light in the darkness, using mitzvot, using belief, using faith, right, faith to banish some of the darkness. And I want to finish with Rav Kook, and it's a source that I brought in the Jerusalem, but it's a source that I keep coming back to. I really need to just blow it up and put it somewhere where I can see it every day. הצדיקים האמיתיים אינם קובלים על החושך אלא מוסיפים אור. אינם קובלים על הרשעה אלא מוסיפים צדק. אינם קובלים על הבורות אלא מוסיפים חוכמה. אינם קובלים על הכפירה אלא מוסיפים אמונה. So the pure righteous do not complain of the dark, they increase the light. They don't complain of evil, they increase justice. They don't complain of ignorance, they increase wisdom. They don't complain of heresy, they increase faith. And I think I can hear Rav Sachs absolutely applauding to this source, the Sfat Emet as well, right? This idea of it's very easy to get sucked into, and I think all of us recognize at this time in history in our lives, get sucked into the darkness, the heresy, the borut, the ignorance, all the anti-Jewish sentiments and the inaccuracies that are being paraded around all over the world, and yet The question is, how do we respond? How can we increase light, justice, wisdom, and emunah and faith? And I feel that's what's giving me hope. I do have tremendous hope in the young people, in the community of Jews around the world. I was at the rally in Washington. It just turned out I was in the States, and I went and seeing that many Jews, really all looking very different. I was very nervous that I would go and it would all be Orthodox Jews from like Riverdale and Montreal. And in the end, it was this wonderful sweep of Jews from across the United States. As I said, there were so many people, and I didn't run into everyone I knew was there, and I ran into no one. That's how many people were there. And usually you go to Jewish events every block, like at the Israel Day Parade. I wouldn't be able to walk a block without running into someone I knew. I did not see anyone. I was with Yedida, my sister, and we ran into like two people we knew. Like it was that huge. And there's power there, and there's power here as well in our continuing to bring light into the darkness. I wish us all a Hanukkah Sameach. I wish that all of your loved ones are safe, and when we get to the end of Hanukkah, we will have experienced a Hanukkah miracle, and we will be in a lighter place. Thank you.
Amen.